Right, good afternoon. So today is part 2 of this series on myth and mind, and the intention of this series is re-looking at certain aspects of mythology, and the aspects could be stories, it could be characters, it could be symbols coming from mythology around the world, and to look at how do we reconnect with it in today's day and time. Right? With the assumption being that if you look back at the root word for myth and mythos, the Greek root, mythos is spoken truth, right? And therefore it's assumed that when we talk of mythology, whatever is a myth was a truth at some point in time. Of course, over the period of ages, as culture has evolved and in many ways eroded, we've lost the essence of the spoken truth, and therefore what was myth and what was truth at one point in time is now interpreted only as a story. Right? However, that there is a lot of power in each of these stories should we choose to stop interpreting it literally and look at the symbolism behind it. Right? So, and that's true for pretty much any body of mythology around the world, including India, the Greek myths, the Roman myths, Egyptian mythology, South American mythology, all of which are really rich bodies of literature, and they have a lot to offer in terms of learning. So, and given the crisis of consciousness, if I may use that term today, it is all the more important that we tap into every body of wisdom that is available and accessible to us and look at how do we evolve as a community, as a collective. So the last time in this series was the introduction, where we spoke about why mythology and what is its connect with mind and our psychology in today's day and time. Today we'll specifically focus on one particular archetype, which is the archetype of the Arjuna, which for me is also a personal favorite in that there is so much to learn from this one character of the Mahabharata. Now, if you look at the character of the Arjuna, it is cast as a warrior character, right? Which is very similar to other warrior characters in other myths. So you see a lot of warrior characters in Egyptian mythology. Greek mythology is full of warriors, right? Roman myths are full of warriors. So the archetype is very potent, and it's very popular in the sense it's fairly universal. And the definition of a warrior in most of these mythologies is someone who fights for what is right. Right? Now the tricky part is the right part of it, because the right is very contextual. Right? Yeah? It's very relative, and it is about, does this warrior fight for what is right in that time and age from his perspective, right? Now, some of the things that strike us as we look at Arjuna as an archetype is that he's cast as an archer, right? Specifically an archer, where if you look at the 5 Pandava brothers, each of them have their own preferences of how they fight, what kind of a warrior there are, and Arjuna specifically is the ideal of an archer. The archer symbolism is primarily about a lot of focus and concentration, because you can't be hitting around randomly. It's not like a spear or a bow that you're out in the field and fighting. You're somewhere at a distance. An archer typically fights from a distance. The archer is not out there fighting hand to hand, right? There is a distance between the archer and whoever or whatever it is that is the target. Right? So one thing that is striking about Arjuna is the tendency to step back, to fight, but to fight from a distance, right? Which is a very essential quality if we are to look at our approach to life, in that engaging in the battle is really essential. We cannot be a spectator in our own lives. We need to go out and fight for what is deemed to be our duty. However, also the ability to step back, simultaneously and say, I'm going to look at the whole battlefield, I'm going to look at that one particular target that I will zone into amongst the millions of things that I have to deal with in my life, and only shoot at that one specific target. Right? And that by itself is a huge aspect of symbolism that one can learn from, in that for you and me as warriors in our day-to-day lives, where we are striving to achieve various things, and the striving could be in terms of our day-to-day living, our relationships, our work, anything that there is. And there's this huge battlefield where there are a million other distractions, right? And the distractions come in the form of environmental concerns, political issues, family issues, all kinds of things that try to take our attention away, that try to engage us in our fight. And the archer's message is to say, no, I'm not going to shoot at all of it. I'm going to shoot at that one particular target, and make sure that even as I engage, I'm also maintaining a view of the full battlefield, and therefore I fight from a distance. Right? So that's one major aspect of the archetype. Well, the way I find Arjuna also challenges us as a lesson is not about identifying a target and shooting at it, but to shoot at a specific aspect of the target. For example, this representative figure of where in his marriage to Draupadi, the condition was that he can get married to her if he manages to shoot the eye of a fish that happens to be rotating in a pond. It's not the entire fish, but yeah, specifically the eye of a fish. And also he cannot really have direct view of the fish, he has to be looking at a reflection of it down in the water and then shoot up. Right? So it's the archetype seems to challenge us to say, of course have targets, but there again zone in, not the whole fish, the eye of the fish. Right? So to look at what specifically are we looking to achieve in any moment in time. Right? So the larger message therefore seems to be about saying that, one, shoot purposefully. Right? So we're not shooting random, right? So live with a purpose of, and when I say shooting, the shooting could be having a conversation, the shooting could be cooking a vegetable, the shooting could be doing something at work, whatever the shooting represents. Yeah, right? So the shooting could be anything that we do in our personal or professional or our social lives. But the message seems to be that shoot, but shoot with specific intention, not aimlessly. And therefore if you're having a conversation, not have random conversations, don't talk for the sake of it, but speak to a point. Right? If you're addressing an issue at work, address it to resolve that particular issue, not to while away time. Right? So that there's a very rich message in just the aspect of shooting. The second aspect about being an archer is, aside from shooting in a targeted manner from a distance, is archers are typically solo fighters. Right? Unlike, let's say, spare soldiers who fight as a group, right? Archers tend to fight one-to-one. They're not engaging with the masses. Right? And therefore also the message coming through from there about saying, I have to own up to my battle and live up to my battle, that the whole community is not going to fight for me and I am not going to fight for the whole community. I trust I can support the rest of them, I can back up my brothers in battle as Arjuna did, but my fight is my fight and I have to own up to it whether I like it or not. Right? And no matter what miserable a condition I may be in. And there are several instances in the Battle of Mahabharata where Arjuna demonstrates that thing about being a solo fighter, in that, for example, when his son Abhimanyu was killed in a Chakravyuh, and which was deemed unfair in that he was a small boy and he was one young boy attacked by many warriors. Right? So the next day of the battle, after Abhimanyu was killed, it is Arjuna's chance for a retribution to kill Jayadratha and seek revenge, and the choice is given to him in terms of saying, your son has died, you are in mourning and you need not do it, right? And nobody would have blamed him had he not turned up to the battlefield the next day because he was in mourning, and yet he turns up and he vows that no, solo fighter, I'm going to fight, I'm going to kill, and if I don't achieve my target, I will kill myself as well, right? And therefore there is that vow that he comes in with the next day on the battlefield, where he says that if I don't kill Jayadratha the next day before sundown, yeah, I'm going to kill myself, right? And then of course it so transpires that there's an eclipse and it's misconstrued as sunset, and eventually Jayadratha does get killed. But just the vow of the warrior to say, if it's my fight, I own it, regardless of circumstances. I may be grieving for somebody, I may be in a bad shape, and yet I will show up and fight my battle, no matter what. Right? Or I'll go down fighting. Either way, I own up the battle. Right? So there are many aspects, therefore, to the idea of the archer, the Arjuna being an archer. The primary of which is the idea of focus and concentration, and his tenacity to enhance that concentration in every possible way. It is in a lot of the stories associated with the Mahabharata, they say Arjuna had a tendency to also practice at night because he wanted to sharpen his vision. Right? So it was not just about doing the regular tutoring that other students did during the day, but also to make that effort to say, I'm going to sit back at night and work to hone my vision. The other allegory that comes through that is among the Pandavas, he seems to be the only character that seems to actively engage in both his masculine and his feminine traits and energies, and trying to build both. Right? Typically the warrior, if you look at well, the patriarchal representations of any of these epics, battles happen in the day, right? Which is the energy of the sun, which is a very masculine trait. And the Arjuna is among the very few warriors who's also supposed to say, I will practice at night and I'm ready to battle at night if necessary, right? So the night and the realm of the moon being the realm of the feminine, and therefore the engagement, or at least the striving to also engage with the feminine much as he engages with his own masculine energies and traits. Among the other ways in which he seems to be engaging with his feminine is art. He's supposed to have been a very good dancer as well. Right? So one of the forms that he embodies during the Mahabharata is that of Brihannala, which is a half man, half woman, which is typically described as a eunuch character, but a transgendering character in one phase of the Mahabharata where he is required to be in hiding, which also seems to again indicate the comfort with saying I am as masculine as I am feminine, and I'm okay to embody both. Even as I maintain the overarching form of a man, I'm okay to work with both aspects of me. So just the archer aspect of Arjuna itself is a lot to learn from and to reflect on. The other piece about Arjuna and about many heroes that we see in myths around the world is the reluctancy of the hero to be one to start with, right? And that's the scene at the end of chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita, where the chapter 1 describes the whole battle scene and how both the armies are assembled, and at the end of the chapter 1 Arjuna asks Krishna to say, I want to see who I'm fighting, take me to the center of the battlefield, right? And he's taken to the center where he actually has a look at the family, the cousins, the grandfathers, the uncles that he's expected to kill, right? And if we go back to referencing Joseph Campbell's archetype of the journey, the heroic journey, Campbell says that any time in any of our lives, given that we are the heroes, heroines of our own lives, anytime that there is a call to adventure, a call to battle, to say, go and get this done, the hero in us is reluctant. The hero wants to pull back and say, no, I don't want to fight. And it's a very natural instinct in that there is an inherent violence in day-to-day lives that we resist. We do not like to engage in that violence. And the violence doesn't have to be about being riotous or killing somebody, but violence in terms of something as simple as, let's say, if I happen to go and have a difficult conversation with somebody, there is a violence in the sense that I am willing to give up the relationship as it is and taking a chance to say, I'm going to look at stating the truth and figuring out what happens. So in one sense, I'm willing to kill what is here and now and look at whatever may birth in the future, which may be good or bad, I don't know, right? I may happen to go and have a difficult conversation with my boss and come back losing the job. It's a possibility, but if that conversation is needed, it's needed. There is also the possibility that the situation might resolve very well for both of us, right? But the courage to have that conversation means I'm willing to kill the status quo, right? And that's the reluctance of the hero, that I don't want to kill the status quo because I don't know what will come next. It may be good, but may not be good also, right? And therefore Arjuna's reluctance to say, this is family, how do I kill? And then of course in the Gita, Krishna goes on to explain that it's an illusion and it's ultimately all comes back to Krishna, and therefore it's not so much about Arjuna killing as much as Arjuna being the vessel through which the killing happens. The other aspect of this particular scene and image is Arjuna claiming his Kshatriya identity, right? And for me that's a critical piece about this particular archetype, in that there is so much need for each of us to embody the Kshatriya consciousness now on this planet today, right? The Kshatriya consciousness is about fighting for what is right, fighting for what is eternally right. We're not talking of right in the context of, temporary truth, for example, in terms of religion or caste, but we're talking about what is eternally right. For example, the fact that, values which are eternal, perpetual, right? For example, the fact that we need to honor the planet that we live on is an eternal truth, and that's not a relative question. It's not about saying we'll value it in the industrial age and not in the agricultural age, or we'll value it when Trump is in power or not, right? The planet needs to be valued, and period, right? There is no argument. Yeah. So these are timeless truths, and the fight of the Kshatriya is about the timeless truth. It's not about the truth of the day, right? Which is where, even as the term right is relative, it's also simple. It's just that we're not really trained to make the simple right, timeless truth choices very often, because we are trained to also look at what is subjective to me, what's more convenient to me here and now. So if it's more convenient to me to take up a plastic bag, I might just do that to save time, not realizing that there is a larger impact I'm causing in the long run, right? And therefore the Kshatriya consciousness that we invite through Arjuna is about saying that, look at the timeless truth. What is right always needs to be fought for. And therefore, even if in the short term I happen to be killing family, that's all right, because that's still duty. Right? And therefore, also for us to reflect on saying, what are the timeless truths we are willing to live for and fight for and die for? And there are a lot of those things that are calling out for battle at this point in time. One is the environment as a whole. Two is the ethical axis of us as a planet, as us as a country going into elections now, looking at what are we voting for. And so we've been having these dialogues as a part of my work around conscious politics and conscious voting. And one of the things that we've been speaking about is that a lot of times I may tend to vote based on my preference, right? And me and my constituency thinking about saying, okay, maybe we should have more avenues for higher education that's made affordable to people. But if I have to look at the masses probably need drinking water. Right? The masses probably need accessible roads to get to their villages, and therefore the higher education that I think is so important is not necessarily priority. Right? And therefore, can I also have the compassion to connect with that and say, can I vote for that too? Not only vote from my perspective and therefore create an elitist kind of a choice, but also to say what will benefit the masses the most. Right? If you look at the archetype of the Kshatriya in general, Arjuna included, it's the Kshatriya consciousness is about claiming ownership of the larger community. Right? It's about Kshatriyas if you look at the Indian myths, Kshatriyas are people that fight for the nation as a whole, fight for entire communities, entire continents, right? It's not about saying I will fight for my family. Right? That's a lower level of consciousness. The Kshatriya consciousness is about saying that I'm in service of the larger good. And that's something that is calling us out in a big way now to look at in our own small little ways, whether it's through having a conversation or by making a post on Facebook or whatever is it that we do. How do we engage in that battle? Right? And the engagement is the way Arjuna does. It's about being out there in the battlefield but also fighting from a distance. Right? And therefore not really getting caught into the subjective truth about saying who's hitting me from where, but about being up there on the chariot, maintaining a bird's eye view, and at the same time also fighting in a very targeted manner in ways where I can serve the most, where my skills or knowledge or service can be most useful for the larger community. Right? If it means therefore that I need to only shoot the eye of a fish and not the whole fish, then strive for doing that. Okay. So yeah, there is the reluctance of the hero, but what is a great lesson to learn from Arjuna is he gets over that reluctance. And the getting over the reluctance happens by absolute trust in Krishna, right? And which is where he also embodies the idea of a disciple. Disciple as against a student. Right? In the culture that we live in, all of us are familiar with and perhaps brought up as students, and the role of a student is taken what the teacher says, very often represent it back in an exam in some form and get on with life, right? And it's very rare therefore that a student ends up transforming or changing too much in the course of studies, right? I may have a lot of fancy degrees, but I may end up being exactly the same person that I was because it's just been knowledge that I've been grappling with. I've not allowed the knowledge to really transform me. Right? And therefore the idea of a disciple is about saying, I allow the knowledge to transform me. So at the end of that degree or whatever is it that I come out with, I am no longer what I went in as. I've moved out as a different person. Right? And which is where the idea of the idea of what was called the Gurukul in India or the academies in Greece used to be about saying that the disciple doesn't come to class every day and go back home. The disciple stays with the master, because it's not just about the specific knowledge of the master that he or she is expecting to gain, but the fact that for that specific knowledge to be operational and useful and in service of the world, there is an entire lifestyle around it which needs to be learned. There is an entire thought process around it that needs to be learned. Yeah. And therefore the disciple also needs to learn how the master cooks and how the master cleans and participate in all of that, even as he learns that one specific skill, which in Arjuna's case was archery.
Another way may be killing your your ego also, because
Oh yes.
Even kings, children also will be in
Yeah.
the same place.
Yes.
Same level.
Same level.
Same level, and all of them do the most basic duties, including sweeping the floor and cooking and cleaning dishes and all of that, right? And therefore it brings us back into connection with timeless truths, because when we are working on ground at that level, then we are also in connection with what vegetables grow in what season,
Yes.
right? What kind of cleaning needs to happen in what season, when do we store water, when do we do a certain activity, and therefore we also then naturally become attuned to the rhythms of nature, which are eternal truths. And then those eternal truths guide the fight in terms of saying, okay, how do I know what is the right thing to fight for? I fight for the eternal truths, which I know because I've lived that in my being a disciple. Right? In being a student, we don't really get to have that experience, because then we're just regurgitating knowledge. So yeah, the reluctance is overcome because he chooses to be a disciple of Krishna, not a student of Krishna, and therefore whatever Krishna says is allowed to transform him. And therefore at the end of the chapter 18 of Bhagavad Gita, he comes out saying, yes, I'm willing to fight. Now there is no question about who should I kill, because I know what is the timeless truth, and therefore I'm okay to kill because I know what is right for me. And therefore showing up for that sense of duty. So, and there are of course many other things that one can learn from the Arjuna archetype, but I'm going to wrap up here today. So the lessons primarily from this particular character for me is, how do we embody the Kshatriya consciousness? How do we go out and fight even if it's unpleasant, after having connected with the fact that there is a duty and I need to show up for my duty? Whether or not my ego regards it as pleasant or not is a different question. But if I'm in service of the world, then I have to show up. Right? And that Kshatriya consciousness gets embodied because there is the attitude of a disciple to say, I will allow learnings to transform me. And the learnings may come from various spaces, right? So in today's context, the learning may come from social media, it may come from a textbook, it may come from a teacher, a guru. And it needs to change me so that I stay in service. In the process, Arjuna, if we look at the story of it, was willing to journey to the highest mountains and the depths. If you look at the things that he was expected to do in the course of the exile, where they lived in forests and mountains, and he had to procure weapons and food and things from different very difficult spaces. He was willing to explore those difficult spaces, and above all embrace his duty. And his duty, as he deemed, was service of the larger truth, and he was willing to do what it takes to serve that larger truth. And therefore the parting thoughts are in terms of, where are we, the Kshatriyas, in our own lives? How do we show up for the fights that we have to fight, the good fight? Are we willing to be disciples and not students? Which means if we take in any form of learning, any form of content, which we believe is reliable, then how do we transform, how do we change, and how do we embody and live the change? And how do we embrace duty in our day-to-day spaces? So that's the reinterpretation that I'd like to leave you with today. All right, thank you.
Thank you.